believing that it's moments like these, it's the good times that make our lives. Family and friends, all the kids gathering, feeling good vibes in the sunshine. All I want is this feeling to last. Can it be that it's all the time? Take a lift while I drip the sweet honey, a drip into golden wine. I feel like chasing the sun. Never want the sun to go away, away. I feel like chasing the sun.
Hi, I'm coming to you today from Santa Barbara, California. It's a very important location because we put together a conference looking at the Diablo nuclear power plant in Fukushima. March 11th, 2011, Fukushima had that terrible accident. You saw it on the news. And a lot of people didn't pay attention, but we are paying attention in Santa Barbara. I'm Barbara Gahn-Mueller, the president of the United Nations Association. When you think about when you open the door to the impossible, what is it about Diablo? What is it about Fukushima that has similarities? Why are we so concerned? It's on the ocean like Fukushima. It has earthquake faults like Fukushima. And with us looking at these terrible situations that could erupt, we have to be prepared. So I'm going to ask you to view the following video and pay attention and invite your neighbors in. Our next speaker is Dr. Jerry Brown, PhD, Director of the Safe Energy Project for the World Business Academy. He commissioned the study that you are going to hear about in the next little few minutes.
This is Diablo Canyon. You've seen this, or you know about it. Diablo Canyon sits both in an earthquake zone and in a historic tsunami zone. And Richard Peck, Senior On-Site NRC Inspector, found and reported to the NRC that Diablo Canyon was out of compliance with its operating license, that it was not designed and built to withstand the kind of ground motion from the earthquakes that could occur. His reward from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for trying to protect the health and safety of people was they transferred him to a teaching job in Tennessee and overrode his report. This is what happens if a major accident occurs. We are in downwind from Diablo Canyon, and the big issue here is which way will the wind be blowing and which way would the plume go if there were a major accident. What does a nuclear disaster look like? This is the plume of Fukushima taken by Jet Propulsion Labs on the 4th day. This is where the radiation has gone. And if this were the Fukushima disaster and Diablo Canyon were at the center of that, that radiation plume would already have reached Santa Barbara. So these are the kinds of risks that we are exposed to with Diablo Canyon. A little bit of background on this report. Diablo Canyon, which has been operating since the mid-80s, there's 2 reactors there, opened in 1984 and 1985 respectively, now has produced more radioactivity than was released during the entire Chernobyl accident. A Union of Concerned Scientists study, a very important study on seismic shift, has documented all of the risks, and their report found that Diablo Canyon is at a 1 to 6 risk of a major accident in every year that it continues to operate. I wish I were making these things up, but these are the facts that the Union of Concerned Scientists have come up with. And in the state of California, strontium-90 levels in baby teeth rose steadily, increasing 50% in children born in the 1990s than in the 1980s. Way back in 1962, Rachel Carson, writing in Silent Spring, probably the most important environmental book of the last century, already identified strontium-90 as the silent, sinister partner of all other toxins in the environment. In other words, radiation which comes into the body and can stay for a lifetime can have a major effect on human health. Plutonium goes to the genitals, radioactive iodine to the thyroid, cesium-137, which they found in tuna, goes to the soft tissue. Strontium, the body thinks it's calcium, so it takes it into the bones and to the teeth. So we've known about this before from the fallout, and it was because of this. It was because when they were doing the bomb testing, the Soviets were testing weapons, we were testing weapons, megatons of weapons exploded in the environment, and the Geiger counters were going off the charts at universities, and the first baby teeth study was done, and strontium-90 went up, 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 childhood leukemia went up, 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 childhood cancer went up, 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 up. That's when President Kennedy decided to sign, at the height of the Cold War, the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And he did this with Premier Khrushchev, who was hearing from Sakharov, the father of the Soviet H-bomb, that the same thing, we're poisoning our people. So what that treaty did was it banned above-ground nuclear weapons testing and underwater nuclear weapons testing, and it left underground testing for the military. This is one of the remarkable things about this study. It may be the only, because we believe that California is the only state, or one of the only, we're still checking this, that takes this data, which is from federal CDC, Center for Disease Control, and California state health statistics. This is all public record statistics. They're all available in the public record, and reports them by zip code. So what Joe Mangano was able to do was analyze the cancer rates and the health patterns of the people living very close, within 15 miles of Diablo Canyon and directly downwind within that circle, a little farther on in the further out zip codes of San Luis Obispo County, in the zip codes in Santa Barbara County, closest to the Diablo Canyon reactor, and then in the Santa Barbara City County, where the results are minimal because we're 90 to 100 miles from the reactor. Here are the major findings, and I'll move quickly now through the rest of this. Since Diablo Canyon opened in the mid-'80s, San Luis Obispo has gone from a relatively low cancer to a high cancer county. It went from being below the state level to almost 7% above it, and it is now the highest cancer level of all Southern California counties. This shows in a graph what happened to cancer incidence in San Luis Obispo County in the decades after the plant opened. After Diablo Canyon opens, we see significant rapid increases in thyroid and female breast cancer, highly radiosensitive cancers, as the studies of Hiroshima and Nagasaki demonstrated. Infant mortality, the death rate of infants in their first year of life went up significantly. Childhood and adolescent cancer death rates rose rapidly, and melanoma incidence soared for reasons we do not completely understand, 130% above the rest of the state, and is now the highest in all of California. In the closest counties were the most devastating health impacts, not only cancer, but look, the fetus, the infant, the child, they're the most sensitive. We have adult aspirin, we have childhood aspirin. We know from the EPA that children are more sensitive to every kind of toxin, and for a variety of reasons, much more susceptible and radiosensitive. So we see higher increases in low birth weight children. The ratio of all-cause deaths rose, and in the 10 zip codes in Santa Barbara County, closest to the reactor, we see these kinds of increases in infant mortality, low weight births, and total mortality. The major findings after Diablo Canyon began operations, there were significant increases in disease and death rates in San Luis Obispo County and also in the northern part of Santa Barbara County. This included infant mortality, child and adolescent cancer death, cancer incident for all ages, especially thyroid, female breast, and melanoma, and cancer deaths for all ages. Dr. Jose, who reviewed this, had this to say about the study. Exposure to radiation is well known to result in an increased risk of developing cancer. Until an alternative, plausible explanation is provided, the overwhelming logical conclusion must be that exposure to radiation as a direct consequence of living within a 15-mile radius of Diablo Canyon nuclear power plants results in an increased risk of developing cancer. And this report is stunning. I know it's uncomfortable, and it becomes another reason, along with earthquakes, along with marine life that's being destroyed, why Diablo Canyon must be shut down, and we must move to 100% renewable energies as quickly as possible. Thank you.
I am absolutely delighted to introduce Dr. Harada. Dr. Harada is the physician who allows the person who's not feeling so well to understand how they can heal themselves. He's a doctor, a physician, and a very good friend. Now, you know, he doesn't come only from the experience of being a doctor. He comes from the radiation and how it affected his family in 1945. Dr. Harada, thank you for traveling so far to be here to give us your message today.
What I wanted to do is present maybe a medical health perspective that truly concerns me. I gave a little background on working with Dr. John Goffman in the early days. Probably in the 70s or so, I'll give you a little insight. My background was as a dental surgeon, got a degree in homeopathy, a degree in naturopathy, and a degree in acupuncture and dental acupuncture. So I studied most of my life, and obviously thinking about it, you know, I guess the nuclear bomb issues in Hiroshima and Nagasaki have played probably a pretty significant familial impact also on my life. My parents were in so-called relocation camp in Arizona and whatnot, and I was born outside, and realized now that I look back that the impact of that Hiroshima and Nagasaki forever changed my family's life. My grandfather would not and refused to go back to Japan, and let a tremendous amount of property acquisitions that he had. I mean, you'd think of immigrants, they were poor. I thought your grandfather's just, your grandpa. He gives you a cord and you massage him and he's happy and he cuts your oranges for you and you're happy. But I realized that what happened in World War II had such an impact on him that he was an American after 30 years. I gave most immigrants was to go back to their motherland, make your money here and go back and live your life out. And he had major land acquisitions. I mean, I look back now and my mother said, God, you'd have been a billionaire. You'd have been so wealthy. Your grandfather just went back to Japan, claimed his land. If you didn't go back and didn't claim your land, he kept a house that he built and his aunt lived in there and whatnot. And it was a whole different perspective of a power of a man that I never knew was so powerful. Like the movie The Godfather, where the little kid's spraying, and the Godfather's sitting there and he falls over and dies, and you realize what a powerful man he was. Well, that aspect of understanding radiation and toxicity led me to major changes in my life. And in fact, I helped get the Senate bill passed for mercury toxicity. I had a senator friend of mine, Senator Diane Watson, who was a wonderful angel in our camp, talked about not putting mercury in fillings for children under 18 years old and pregnant women. We got an informed message to go out to the profession that you had to and could advise patients on the toxic hazards of mercury. We would lose our license if we broached the information of telling a patient that mercury is potentially hazardous material. Can you believe that's really a reality? Yeah. Another issue that came up on that was I met someone in the Nuclear Regulatory Agency and said to me, never should let your kids, and you should never go out in the first rain. I said, why? Because he said the nuclear particles get concentrated in the first rain. So let the rain come down, and then you can go ahead and, go out in the rain. So sure enough, I started seeing a correlation between radiation and disease and illness and factors. One of the classic ones, I think, and like Dick pointed out this, had to do with basically, I guess maybe I'll put it this way. When it hits home, you start to become aware and you start to really pay attention. So in 2008, when that U.S. spy satellite was shot down, we shot our own satellite down, and in upper space, I had 3 or 4 patients in Hawaii. And since 1974, I was doing German electroacupuncture. And I also found that in acupuncture also that we were doing electroacupuncture diagnosis according to Dr. Voll. It was a brilliant man who should have been nominated for the Nobel Prize but did not receive it. We learn to start measuring the body energy fields and how the field of the body is probably the most sensitive instrument developed. Your body is probably the finest instrument to detect toxins or this or whatever it is, ever developed. Dick is going to go over a little bit about a Geiger counter. But I became really aware of some of the things that were going on, for example, and I worked in research level. We bought the most expensive Geiger counter at that time. That was a computerized Geiger counter that has actually the ability to diagnose and tell you with an air sample or skin sample or air sample, you can determine what type of radioactive material it is and maybe the degree of hits that it kicks off and how strong it is. The problem that I'm here to discuss with you right now, and I was really hoping there'd be several medical doctor friends of mine here to hear this or be a part of this, is that there is just like they're talking about how Mr. Johnson was talking about the lack of ability to deal with issues. Right now, we really don't have an adequate diagnosis in case you get sick from radiation. There is no adequate diagnosis. You can't go get a blood test, and I found this out the hard way. So when all of a sudden in April of 2008, I became very ill. I knew I got hit with the fallout from that satellite. I never had symptoms. I had diarrhea for 48 hours straight. Every hour. I never knew I had that much fecal matter in me. Okay, but I had a full of that for 48 hours. And fortunately, I had some background and knowledge to be able to pull myself up and out in about 48 hours. I had another doctor friend of mine that got exposed at Chernobyl. She was in Germany, far enough away from Chernobyl. The leakage hit Europe for 2 weeks before it was announced. Do you know why Russia did not announce the leakage of hitting Europe? It took them 2 weeks. Guess why?
Fear.
What?
Fear, perhaps?
Fear, no. They did not want it to affect tourism in their country. It's a big deal. Same thing happened in Hawaii when the Hawaiian volcano erupted about 7 years ago or something like that, and they would not announce how severe. The same woman called me up about the satellite explosion, and they were monitoring. There was at least 7 real key critical toxins in that volcanic effluent coming out, and they notified nobody. Till finally someone in the American Lung Association said, if you don't make this announcement, we're going to go to the press and make the announcement. And of course they finally did, and they said, you need to evacuate. This is the problem. They said, well, we have here too. How do you evacuate? Aloha Airlines just went bankrupt, so there's only one inter-island airline, and then the people said, where am I going to go? Where are we going to go, right? So what happened to me is when I got hit in April, got poisoned. I knew what I got poisoned by, and this was something that, like I said, you and your family members and things, as this goes along in the next year to 2 years, you're going to start seeing, and you may already start to feel this, or you're starting to get symptoms that you never had before, illnesses. When Bruce was talking about Jerry Brown, and I met Jerry Brown and Julie before, and wonderful people, and I really want to give them kudos also, just like, is Jorgen?
Yes.
Jorgen, for these groups and husbands and wives that have went against the system and to protect and do the right thing. And I did that. I did that way back thing on the mercury and amalgam mercury issue and whatnot. And root canals, like Dr. says about the toxicity of root canals. And I got slapped with, where is your scientific evidence? And we're measuring with lecture. We're seeing the direct impact with this technology, what's happening inside the body when there's a root canal there. And when you take the root canal, the organ system reconfigures and the person gets well and gets healed. And and this group was the same group that was, you know, a mercury toxicity group. I said, you're doing the same thing that the traditional dentist did to you. They're saying, where's your evidence-based situation? At least in mercury, you know, it's a toxin. We didn't know about root canals till more relatively recently as the scientific data started coming out. Just like with when I stopped giving full mouth x-rays every year to 2 years, like most dentists were doing, my rationale was maybe the science is not there, but I know cumulative radiation is poisonous, it's toxic, it's lethal. According to John Goffman in his work, he was to me the pioneer in which I rest some of my background on. And so what happened was that I got poisoned. I went to the traditional system because we have a blood test laboratory in Santa Monica that we use for blood tests, chemistries and whatnot. And I said, listen, I want to test for plutonium because I got poisoned and I almost died. I was at 62 at the time and I said, you know something? Twice I almost died. And when you almost die, you know it. If you have a heart attack or this, and you get to that point of death, you know it. Your body knows. You have either premonition, you know that you're going to die. He said to me, Dr. Rada, there is no test. I mean, what do you mean there's no test for plutonium? He says there is no test. Even in homeopathy, we had a very difficult time getting a homeopathic no-so to test patients against because radioactive materials are illegal. You can't possess a radioactive metal like plutonium unless you're a government agency, you're doing it for research process or it's done for medical healing. So I said, well, what's going to happen? I said, do you have one for uranium poisoning? He said, no, we don't. So I said, well, wait a minute now. If someone released a dirty bomb or some terrorist came in and put it in our food or air or something like that, how are you going to diagnose it? He said, we can't. We can't. This happened also with issues of pesticide chemtrail poisoning where I've seen people go into hospitals. And this recently happened also recently with the plume that came in from Fukushima, where actually what they're seeing right now is symptoms, but they can't explain it and they can't diagnose it. This is what we're looking at in the next year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Next year to 2 years, the rod removals, and maybe that's why they put on Channel 7, because they have to get us possibly ready for a potential accident. And it's going to happen. Just the basic rod removals in the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks or so, has created major illnesses and whatnot in patients that I see that are sensitive. Now, I work with older soul beings. I don't work with younger soul beings, because younger soul beings will say to you, you know, where's your evidence? Where's your evidence? You know, where is your scientific data to prove that what your numbers are and what you measure? But I've done this work enough for so many years. It's like someone in acupuncture that does pulse diagnosis. And I met one woman, it was just incredible what she was able to tell me. And that was 20 years and probably intuitive lifetimes of knowledge that she's included, not just in this lifetime. That what it taught me was the deficiency of our medical health care system to really deal with any of the issues that are going on right now. I went out last night because it got so cold there in my motel room that I had to go out and get a space heater. They didn't have enough, their heater did not work. Just going outdoors at nighttime, I came back and I felt I got radiation poisoned. And I had to do it myself at 2:30 in the morning. Now, let me share with you, I was a toxicologist friend of mine. And when I was coming into Santa Barbara, I saw the chemtrails over in the sky, and you saw that beautiful pink sunset. We started seeing this about 2.5 years ago, and I saw that I knew people were getting really sick. It was actually, I thought it was carcinogenic in my measurement reads. And so what happened was I didn't know what it was. And finally I talked to this world-class toxicologist, and she said, oh, I can tell you what that is. I said, what is it? She said, it is pink diamond dust. That's in there. And so that gives a diffraction. She said, well, they used it at UCLA and IV it to get contrast and whatnot. So there are things that are being put in their air and landing in our water and will end up in our food. But Fukushima is part of it. They're cumulative.
You're now going to meet Bruce L. Erickson. He's a community activist and a very involved citizen. If there's something wrong, Bruce is there to make sure we get the experts to help us understand the situation.
What I want to point out to you is that when you approach the nuclear issue from the issues of also sustainability, and you look at a broader picture of this whole issue, you understand that we're on a threshold of a whole new understanding of science, of consciousness, of individual responsibility for our health, individual responsibility for our environment, and for God's sake, some intelligence and common sense from the policymakers or the people that do drive the institutions, because brain deadness is an epidemic there. So what we look at it from the standpoint of sustainability is that, and this is how I feel personally, is this whole thing of Fukushima, this light, is also a beckoning call that we really need to think our relationship, rethink it, with relationship to the universe, relationship with nature, relationship to Mother Earth, relationship to ourselves, and no holds barred and no constraints from past conditioning of cultures, religions, limited thinking in sciences, limited thinking in policy making, limited thinking, in governance. And in other words, this is an issue that requires the collaboration across the board. By the way, I want to point out, Tamio and Mariko, my Japanese colleagues and friends, Tamio was actually, you might say, I hate to use the word victim, but suffered the impact directly of the radiation, and Dr. Hirata has been his physician getting them through this situation. And when I saw Tamio in June, I'm not a doctor, but I could tell you right now the prognosis didn't look very good, and he's much better thanks to the wizardry of this gentleman. So we've got Japanese colleagues and friends and everything over there who've been through this, so we know it firsthand. Let me briefly just say, from my longtime friend and colleague, Dr. Richard Willard, is a nuclear engineer by training, but I want to say an extraordinary human being. And when I talk about people of science with open minds and looking at things from a broad perspective with intelligence and wisdom and a heck of a lot of common sense, he makes me look legitimate when I try to trip off the direction I shouldn't be. But anyway, Dick will be conducting the orientation and the training on the Geiger counters later on this afternoon. So he's indeed an expert. By the way, in the 1980s was one of the leading experts in the United States on nuclear waste containment.
I've been giving talks since Fukushima more on the physical and chemical aspects of nuclear reactors, and so people could understand what a reactor was and a fuel element and a pool. And normally I give those talks, but today I'm going to kind of give a preliminary talk that'll help you understand what Ellen has to say in Vaughn. It gets into what radiation is a bit, but more into some of the effects that, we've talked about, the Pacau effect and things like that. So, hope you can see the screen. Next slide. Be the one on the right. So first place, it's important to differentiate between ionizing and non-ionizing radiation. And by ionizing, we mean something that's powerful enough that when it hits an atom, it basically knocks the electrons off and makes it an ion. It's missing an electron or a proton or whatever, and it breaks the bonds, and it'll damage your DNA. And X-rays, which you're familiar with, are ionizing radiation, or gamma rays. Beta particles, which are electrons, alpha particles, which are like a ionized helium atom, These are what, when we talk about radiation from reactors, but we're living in all this other radiation field, your cell phone, your wireless, your microwave, everything, And Cindy Sage was originally invited here. She's a world expert on this area here. Checking the EMF in your house, your plugs, and so forth. And she just wrote a nice paper where she linked these two. So one of the things that we'll try to get as a message here is that low doses, the high doses of these, either kill you right away or you live, okay? Low doses over a long period of time are actually worse in both cases. Okay, so as I mentioned, radiation is exposure to an external field. That's what you're used to when you go get an x-ray or a dental x-ray or whatever. And obviously you can get sick for that because it can go into your body. But generally does not make your tissues radioactive. So I want to differentiate between external exposure to radiation and internal. Contamination is what we refer to as when you have contact with and you retain the radioactive material. Typically a small particle or something that may be in the food you eat, it may be in the air, it may be a little particle, nanoparticle of plutonium coming over Fukushima. And this is really a big problem that we're facing right now. And I have another talk later, but basically down on the bottom, what you may not be able to see is the different types of radiation, alpha, beta, gamma. An alpha particle can be stopped with a sheet of paper. It won't even hardly go through your skin. It's very energetic, but it's stopped easily. You can see a beta, that's the green. It can be stopped by a piece of wood. But the gammas, those can go right through you, like an X-ray. Okay, it takes like several inches of lead or something to stop it. So, okay, next one.
Question,
Yeah.
is there a difference between gamma and X-ray?
No, not really. Just a wavelength.
It's synonymous.
They're basically the same. They're just little different wavelength.
Yeah.
They're both nasty.
But Dick, back on this one, because on an X-ray, you hit the X-ray and it just does it for that couple thousandths of a second.
Right.
But the long-term effects of the stuff that stays in your body, particle,
Right.
that just keeps like causing
Yeah.
oxidative damage for
Next slide,
years
actually.
and years, or
Yeah, there it is here. And that is, again, when you've got an external in case A, it's radiating your body and it's coming in and it's kind of spread out over the organ or whatever, okay, over your whole body, if it's X-ray, or wherever you had the X-ray, your mouth, okay, that's this one. However, if a particle gets into your body, into your lungs, it causes extremely local and bad damage right in that place where your lung is, or if it's in your kidney, or wherever it is. This is really much worse than that.
keeps causing that.
And keeps causing, this stays there. Well, there's two things which I do want to point out. There's the radioactive half-life, like cesium-137, 30 years, but there's also the biological half-life. Everything we put in our body kind of has a half-life before it kind of comes out. And for cesium, I think it's like 90 days or something. So some of this, presumably, will be excreted from the body. Okay, this is just, I don't know if you can see it, but these are just the different ways we get exposed to radiation, the cosmic rays, the stuff that's in the ground, the natural uranium, the radon. What do we got? The potassium-40. I'm going to show that in the second talk at the end. I'll actually show you how radioactive you already are by eating bananas and so forth. Okay? And so you can see it comes from everywhere, right? We're getting exposed. And this doesn't count the EMF and the non-ionizing. If you throw in the wireless and the cell phones, I mean, if we could see all the radiation going through this room, it'd be a fog. Next one. And pathways, well, this is like he was talking about the milk, okay? It comes down from the ashes that came up from Fukushima or Chernobyl or whatever. It comes down, gets in the ground, gets in the grass, the cows eat the grass, gets in the milk, goes up the food chain, bioaccumulates in the fish, same thing in the ocean. So it's coming from everywhere. Next one. And this again is, when I was in the radiation business, I ran what's called a hot cell, which was where we examined nuclear stuff. And we had to be very careful about what we did, because if you weren't careful enough, you might get a particle on your shoe and take it home. And that has happened at times at some of the national labs, you know. So we had, and then this will get in later, I was responsible for that part, but I was not responsible for the health physics part, because that was quality controlled. I could not manage them. They told me what to do. These were the people that checked me to make sure I didn't go home radioactive. And that's the kind of thing we'll get in the second talk, is you can just get it from everywhere and it goes all over the place, okay? It's a little bit like if you eat honey or something and all of a sudden everything's sticky. You know how that is? No matter what you do. Well, think about radioactive. Yeah, I know it, me too. It never fails. But radiation does the same thing, but you don't know it. It's going all over and it's sticking all over. Okay, next slide. This is probably hard to read, but again, this is going into, you know, what dose is good or bad, and some people think there is no dose that's good, and it goes up. I think this is in microsieverts, and basically an X-ray, flying on a plane, chest X-ray, annual exposure 50 micro. As it gets up, you see over here we're starting to get around 400, which is what was observed at Fukushima. It's starting to get kind of dangerous. You get up to here and you got a problem, okay? At 5, these are microsieverts. Yeah, 5 millisieverts. 1 sievert is bad. 1 sievert is 1 gray, that's bad, okay? So if you accumulate 1 sievert over some period of time, you're going to have a problem. I think this was, I get this from, anyway, there's some people like Woods Hole and some oceanographic people are doing some good studies on what's in the ocean. And somebody put out this slide of all the different radiation that's got in the ocean for a long time here. In other words, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima, nuclear weapons testing, natural. And you can just kind of see by the size, the amount. And of course, there's a heck of a lot from all that testing that we did before it went underground. And I don't know, it just gives you an idea. There's potassium itself, which is natural. It's got its version. So just Fukushima isn't the only source. Next slide. Here's one. Pretty sure this is Woods Hole study. And there's this big thing now about bluefish tuna and high cesium-137 and so forth. And what's the exposure? What's the cesium-137 immediately off Fukushima? It was really high, okay? And if it was just that accident, this should have decayed down like that. Here's background, normal, okay? But it didn't. And the reason it didn't is there's this continual 300 to 400 tons of radioactive water that goes in every day into the ocean, okay? So some people say, here's where it's the glass half full, half empty, okay? Half full. Whoa, it's still, you know, under the EPA drinking water limit. We're okay. The other half empty. It was originally here. So we got a big increase here. So I just want to show you how science works. You can look at it from the top or the bottom. This was the iodine measured, let's see, Little Rock and Oakland and Tokyo exceeded the limits. I remember that, the scare about the milk for the infants in Tokyo. Mothers shouldn't feed their babies the milk. And that's just kind of summarizing that. San Francisco. And it is important that's getting down to the bottom line is, in the first place, iodine has a short half-life, so it's really only a kind of a big issue right after an accident or right after release. But it's a nasty one because of the thyroid. So a biological half-time is 23 days in a 5-year-old and 80 days in an adult. That's how much it turns over. So you do have to account, it not only gets into you, but some of it will come out through your own detoxing cycle. Yeah, I said it's about 120 days. So we really don't know what's going on in the body, okay? It gets there, does some of it come out? Does it get trapped? Does it get caught in the fatty tissue? Who knows, right? Next slide.
This is the research that I'm doing.
Yeah. So this is a nice one. This is I got this from Ernie Gunderson, if you know him. He's one of the better spokespersons for this whole business, and he has a great site, fairwinds.org, and fair is F-A-I-R-E, winds. Highly recommend him. This is a really nice one. This is Arnie, and he got car filters, air filters from cars, and did what's called autoradiography. You just take a piece of X-ray film, whatever, and you put the air filter on it, and you put it in a safe or someplace that's shielded, and you just leave it there. And if there's radioactive particles in the filter, they'll bombard the film and make dark spots, okay? They'll expose it. And so this was Fukushima City, this was Tokyo, and this was Seattle. And you can see how radioactive particles were picked up in the car air filters. So what does that mean about breathing? All other stuff. Okay. Well, this is what Alan's going to talk about, and the first one is basically, if you already got problems and you're getting chemtrails and you're getting GMO and you're getting whatever, and then you get hit with radiation, it may not be 1 + 1 = 2, and Alan's going to talk about that. The cumulative effect is of greater risk to children, as we mentioned, unborn fetus, and there's the effect on you, and then there's the generational effect. How much of this is carried forward to future generations? Okay, so we just got into that. So what are factors that influence it? Well, if your antioxidant capacity is good, and you got reserves, that's a good idea. You're getting a steady or uninterrupted stream of free radical formation when these things are in your body. And what's your capacity to repair, okay? And the prior cumulative stresses are already present in the host. That's the things we talked about, whether it's environment. Stress is a big one. Matter of fact, personally, I think sometimes more people die from the fear of radiation than from radiation, because stress is 50% of the equation in many cases. Really.
And when you're stressed out of your mind, that instantly suppresses the immune system, big time.
Yeah.
When you're fighting the tiger, the fight or flight response, you don't have to be fighting viruses and bacteria at the same time, and the body shuts that down. Also shuts digestion down. So,
Bad news.
Sympathetic stress and stress overload. I mean, who isn't suffering with that? And it makes all chronic diseases worse. And that's what we're seeing in our patients and ourselves and our families. And the saying is we've exceeded our adaptive capacity, which was already bad enough.
Yep.
And now you stick this on top of it, and this is probably the worst toxin, a group of toxins, and so, wow, you clearly exceeded your ability to stay even, unless you change something.
Okay, next one. Yeah. And we're getting a little more technical here, but I think this is good background for what Vaughn and Alan will say later. And as I mentioned, there's the acute radiation, which kills you or doesn't, and then there's the chronic delayed, okay? And it depends on the type and how long you were exposed and, what was the energy. And radiation sickness can take many forms. What we mentioned, especially, I already mentioned that it goes for the more prolific tissues. That's where it shows up. The breast, thyroid, and bone marrow are the most sensitive to the effects of ionizing radiation. Okay, next. This is an important one, dose and dose rate effects. This is where Vaughn and I had some good discussions in the early days. And Ellen too. Radiation, okay, it depends on the amount of radiation your body absorbs, the dose, the type of radiation, the route of exposure, your susceptibility of your tissue, and the length of time over which you are exposed. It's all pretty logical, okay? Units of dose, well, yeah, let's see. I told you a gray or sievert. That's when you get 1 gray or sievert, you got a problem. And let's not get into the definitions, because I'm going to do that later. Next one. And this is really, I think, the key to, I know what Vaughn and Ellen want to say, and that low dose exposures to ionizing and non-ionizing radiation result in similar damage to the immune system. Mice placed in a contaminated zone and then irradiated in the laboratory had increase of radiosensitivity of bone marrow cells. So if you're exposed already, ionizing, non-ionizing, whatever it is, it's like an allergy. You're tending to build up, and then when the next thing comes, it goes over the limit, you have a reaction. So, and I know Vaughn's going to talk about that. And I mentioned that it can be generational. Okay. Allergic, what's what I mentioned. And the adaptive response decreases with continuing exposure, which leads to many diseases, tumors, and infectious diseases, and I'm pretty sure Alan's going to talk about that. Okay, next. This was a Chernobyl study, which was where I first came across a lot of this, and it studied the effects of low-dose exposure and DNA of liver and spleen cells, activity of enzymes, antioxidants, all these things were studied, and what basically, in this case, they had a bimodal dose dependence. The effect increased at low doses, and then in some cases, which is really unusual, it's a little bit like homeopathy. In some cases, you get what's called hormesis. Very low doses, it actually, to some people, can be beneficial. Just like homeopathy, you sort of take the poison, does the cure, you know. That's very controversial. The Picot effect, which is at 26 rads per minute, if you get 3,500 rads required to destroy a cell membrane, but at 0.7 rads is required at 0.001. So in other words, this amount of damage will cause the same amount of damage as that over a long period of time. That's called the Picot effect.
And long meaning years, 10 years, 20 years? What's long?
Well, it depends. If the dose is, it's a function of the magnitude of the dose and the time. And when you multiply those two, that's when you have a problem. So if it was a little higher dose, and except I don't know where the breaking point is, Alan. You know, how high a low dose before it becomes a high dose? I don't know. Okay. And then, so this is again, how can we protect ourselves? And this is just showing that you've got these free radicals coming towards your cell boundary, cell wall, and you've got to have some armor, some vitamins, some treatment, something to cancel those free radicals. Next. Oh, and this was just an example of, some of you may know who Klinghardt is. He's fairly famous. Was he a dentist originally?
No, he's an MD.
No?
He's an MD.
He's an MD?
From Germany.
Yeah. Anyway, he knows. So he went to after Chernobyl, and he gave the children potassium iodide. He gave them stem cell therapy, DMPS, which I think is, chelation. Right? Thank you. And things like chlorella, cilantro, kind of things like that. The results: most of the children recovered, grew up, and are alive today. Many of the untreated children died of leukemia, lymphoma, immune system breakdowns, et cetera, et cetera. That's just one example of the kind of therapies that were used. And I think Bruce referred to, with Hiroshima, the people that went to a certain hospital, which basically had the...
I'll go into that in my time.
You're going to go ahead? Good. Next one. Good. And I only put this in because this is different than what Alan and Vaughn are going to talk about. It's just another guy, Klinghardt's approach to things. And he has these different supplements, the chlorella, some of his lines, cilantro, fulvic acid. A lot of people are doing that these days. Minerals, obviously we're going to talk about that. You don't want to drink contaminated water. That's more my area, clean up the water. And the water we have here out to drink has been through reverse. There is no radiation, there is nothing bad in it. And we put minerals back in. And then if somebody brought some trace minerals, we can add that, and you can see what Vaughn and Ellen are recommending. So again, I want to remind you, don't forget about other contaminants, drugs, toxic chemicals, fluoride, etc. Take everything out. That's what I just said with a point of use, point of entry. Like Nancy has a point of entry system, the whole house. Where I live, we have whole house. A lot of people have under the sink systems. What else we got? Don't forget the non-ionizing EMF, microwave, cell phones, house circuits, wireless devices. And this is where Cindy Sage comes in, and hopefully one of these days we'll get her. She's really an expert in that. And she'd come around and measure the circuits in your house and measure everything, and has devices that kind of minimize that. Okay, radioactive contamination of air, soil, food, we kind of covered that. Don't forget chemtrails, they're coming down. Pesticides.
Did you see them today?
No, were they banned?
And yesterday too.
The last one was a little plug. I was into sustainable housing. So one of the ways you can avoid some of these things is to grow your food inside in a greenhouse. Then you don't get the radiation fallout, you don't get the chemtrails, all that stuff.
Dr. Alan Sachi is one of those people who can help you understand the effects of radiation. He's a radiation scientist coming to you today to tell you what you need to know about radiation and its effects on you.
Okay, radiation is really heavy metals. Both radiation and heavy metals make every chronic disease worse. And most chronic diseases that we're dealing with, whether it's gum disease, arthritis, insulin resistance, whatever, cancer, these are really diseases of chronic inflammation. And the underlying cause, the underlying defect is chronic inflammation. But acute inflammation is good. That's how we heal, that's how we fight toxins, how we fight cancer, how we fight bacteria and so forth. But when it's chronic inflammation and it doesn't heal, that's when the damage is really produced. Also, it's creating mutations in both our DNA, if that's not bad enough. But even worse, it's creating damage to the DNA in bacteria. Now, nobody's talking about this except some weird scientists and friends of ours who are weird people, you know. And specifically Hal Huggins, who's a dentist and a very famous person for leading the fight against mercury for decades. And he has a very high, what's the right word, well-equipped and a high technical lab to test the bacteria and so forth. And he says the bacteria are, from failed root canals, are so powerful, which we know, equal to botulism toxin. The toxins they make is really the deal. But they're mutating so fast that there's like 90 bacteria that didn't exist years ago that they've identified. And he feels this is the largest problem on planet Earth because the bacteria are mutating at a rate that is so huge, where it was only 1 in every so many million bacteria or something, and now I can't remember the number, but it's just drastically different. And we cannot win against this because the bacteria sort of outnumber us, just slightly. This is the most serious danger to life on planet Earth, if you really understand that at all. The major sources of radiation. This is just a very general, broad scope, brush strokes about this today. We could write a book about, you know, each one of these lines here. The above-ground blasts since the 1940s have been responsible for a huge amount of radiation. Let's call that 1x, just 1x. It may be much more than 1x, and everybody that's you know, about 65 to 66, 67 years age and younger has been subjected to this. And so, like, I was born, I have a twin brother, we were both born premature, about 2.5 months premature. That could have been from that radiation. Can't prove it wasn't. Chernobyl, so all that above ground blasting testing was equal to 1x. Chernobyl was equal to another 1x, to give some sort of perspective. And Fukushima is a 1x or maybe 1.5x now, on its way to 2 and above. And Dr. Apsley wrote this wonderful book. He's a really good friend of ours, Fukushima Meltdown, and he's done a tremendous research job with this book. Says that it's really 6x, or it's on its way to being 6x. And so, you know, this is the biggest threat we've ever faced. It's the biggest environmental disaster in the world, the biggest industrial accident, if you call it that, in the world, and so forth. Okay, make matters even worse. In Unit 4, the Japanese use MOX fuel, which is part plutonium. And they signed treaties like everybody else not to use MOX fuel. It's illegal. Every country has nuclear power plants signed some kind of treaty not to do that, but they did it anyway. And to supposedly make the reaction more efficient, burn hotter, but it didn't even do that. It was not successful in doing that. But plutonium is 15 million times more toxic than uranium. And why would you allow that into the environment? Why would you allow that, any possibility of that to be in the environment? So we had the above ground blast, all these different sources of radiation. We have MOX fuels, and we just found out it might be everywhere. We have the satellites. Then another major source is depleted uranium. And most people are not familiar with depleted uranium. And they think, well, you're saying something, it can't be right. You just must be making that up. And I challenge anyone, just go to the internet, punch in depleted uranium, and you'll get a 6-page article from a doctor, MD in Arizona, and you could read much more detail about it. But they tipped the artillery shells with depleted uranium in both Iraqi wars. And why would they do that? You know, it's like Iraq is like a major threat. That means we got to like use that against them. You know, what the hell's that about? And the soldiers are bringing it home in their bodies, in their hair, in their clothing, and so forth. And depleted uranium is everywhere in the world now. And it's a dust, and when it hits something, it explodes enough, and it goes up high enough in the air that it's a dust. And Dick can comment, because he used to work with it, that it supposedly like goes through armor like it's not there, like a hot knife through butter, and burns very, very hot. You want to say anything about it?
Yeah, well, they use it because of the mass. I mean, tungsten or uranium or things. And it was cheap because after they enriched uranium, they got this stuff. It's just like fluoride, right? Got to find a use for it.
Oh, got to put it somewhere. Okay, the bystander effect. That's what is the bystander effect? The cells directly hit with radiation release tremendous amounts of free radicals, and the worst ones are called reactive oxygen species. If you don't know what that is, it's fine, don't worry about it. And they're very highly pro-inflammatory. And they produce pro-inflammatory cell end products that cause lethal chain reactions. Lethal, key word, lethal. Chain reaction to the surrounding nearby cells, not directly exposed to the low dose of radiation. So cells that weren't hit by the radiation directly, maybe 5 or 8 or 10 cells away from that, of course it's all microscopic, you know, they can die and have a lethal chain reaction of free radicals occur to them also, even though they weren't individually hit by the radiation. Interesting. That's called the bystander effect. And both the Petkow effect and the bystander effect can cause massive cell damage and tissue damage, and this is absolutely being ignored, and it's not nonsense. It's been well proven. Okay. Dick, you want to say anything about that?
No, that's right.
Okay. Another concept which we, Vaughn and I talked for a couple of days about this, we decided to add a slide or two in here. Amplification and magnification. And I actually looked those words up in the dictionary to make sure I knew what they meant. And so the negative synergistic effects of combining other toxins, of which we're subjected to massive amounts of toxins these days, chemicals and heavy metals, with radiation on top of that, will amplify the toxic effects 10 to 20 times. 10 to 20 times. An example of this, you take mercury, and you take lead, which are some of the most toxic substances on this planet, and you combine those two, and they're 100 to 500 times more toxic than either one by itself. You take a small amount, it's called, there's something called the LD50, which I learned from this oncologist doctor, called an LD1. I didn't know there was an LD1. That will kill 1% of the animals. So it's such a small dose, it'll kill 1% of the animals. You take the LD1 for mercury, and you combine it with the LD1 for lead, it becomes the LD100 100% of the time. If you understand what I just said, that is pretty crazy radical. How does radiation actually cause harm? We touched upon, Dick was talking about this earlier, and we really covered this, but it destroys cell membranes very effectively. It melts the phospholipids in the cell membranes, and about 60-65% of every cell membrane are phospholipids. The good fats, hopefully, unless you're eating Cheetos all the time, then maybe they're bad trans fats. And it causes massive free radical damage, producing hydrogen peroxides and lipid peroxidation, but it also destroys connective tissue, and connective tissue is what holds us together. And if you have severe radiation exposure, you really just bleed to death and fall apart, and your connective tissue falls apart. It also kills lymphocytes and leads to, obviously, to suppressed immune system. And the only thing that's going to keep us surviving is our immune system, so that's not too good. How are we not going to get cancer if you have a suppressed immune system? The atomic bomb at Nagasaki, Bruce mentioned this several times today. This is a little bit of the story. A tale of two hospitals, what I call it. There are two hospitals 1 mile from ground zero. in different directions. One hospital, everybody died from radiation sickness. All the staff died, all the doctors died, all the patients died, all the clerical people, everybody died. The other hospital, equal distant, about a mile away in a different direction, all the doctors lived, all the nurses lived, all the staff lived, and 80% of the patients survived. Now, to be in a hospital, there has to be something wrong with you to be in the hospital in the first place. So some of those people are going to die because there was something really seriously wrong with them. And so for 80% of the people in the hospital to survive was pretty amazing. And basically, what did they do? The doctor that ran that hospital, he immediately instituted miso several times a day, seaweed, lots of minerals is what that's about, and a vegetarian alkaline diet. My conclusion, we live in a very toxic world. Life is uncertain, so eat dessert first.
Okay. Good advice.
Back in the 70s, I contacted a Dr. John Goffman. He was an MD that worked on the Manhattan Project, worked out of Berkeley, was a pioneer and became an anti-nuclear activist. But he had patents on nuclear fission for plutonium-233 and 239, I believe, and worked on different projects in the area of radiation, and he actually became an advocate for the non-proliferation of nuclear reactor sites and use of actually atomic nuclear materials in space. One of his things that he did was he actually monitored after a U.S. satellite exploded in the 60s, carrying nuclear materials, and I believe it was the first plutonium-carrying satellite that exploded in space. He tracked the epidemiology of that over about 2 years. And he found out there was an epidemic of lung cancer. So it was he, John Goffman, who actually inspired Dr. Helen Caldicott in Australia to apparently go and develop this Physicians for Nuclear Responsibility. He was one of the, I call him one of the godfathers of anti-nuclear proliferation. So from that standpoint, I was interested in talking to him because he was the one who really propagated the fact of low, and Dr. Sage is going to go, is low dose cumulative radiation is lethal. Is lethal. So he developed this concept. So I contacted him in the early days, and he was up in San Francisco at the time, and he was the one that basically said to me that yes, that the research is showing that yes, as a dentist, you're around x-rays all the time. There's, it's always going off the x-ray. Even if you're not near there, we found out that even 3 offices down, the effect of x-rays can be felt in the energy field of the human body. One of the reasons why I wanted to get this group together is because I wanted to start a core group in Santa Barbara. And we're going to set up sometime, if there's an interest in this, then Dr. Sage and I will come down here and set up a workshop to actually teach you how to deal with what's coming. Dr. Caldicott spoke, I think, on Coast to Coast about 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago. And she really painted a scenario what's going to happen with Fukushima. Okay, she really was not a good scenario. I mean, I have a couple of heads nodding here. And when the first person, and she's talking about all the things that are going to happen, genetic damages, this, illnesses, cancer, blah, blah, blah. The first person who got on the phone and talked to her, asked her, but Dr. Caldicott, what can we do as a person to protect ourselves from what is going to come? And the answer she gave was a little shocking to me. She said, there's nothing you can do. Do you remember that? She said, there's nothing you can do. And I was really sad when I heard that. For someone who's an icon in the field, to say there's nothing to do. Now, I'm going to go back 12 years ago, maybe, and I was always kind of involved in radiation research, and I had a chance to meet the head physician of Desert Storm. His name was Joe Calabrese. He was an MD before we went into Iraq with the Bush administration, the first time we went into Iraq, and I had a chance, a friend of mine was personal friends with him. I said, I would love, they wanted me to treat this child. I'm a healer. I'm a, how should I say, an intuitive healer. So he wanted me to come over there and do a healing on his son. He had a 9-year-old son at the time. But I wanted to know, as the head of the U.S. Army military, what did they have for the soldiers if they were inadvertently exposed to nuclear materials? And so idea behind that was, what do you have in your armamentarium? You know, and at that time also too, he said, I want to know about, for 2 or 3 months in the holistic medical field, intravenous vitamin C disappeared. We couldn't get it. Just like after Fukushima happened, you can get iodine. It got swallowed up. Okay, so in fact, the Koreans bought most of the wholesale inventory in the United States because they're right next to Japan. And they're good business people, okay? So what happened was that when I asked them this question, I said, what do you have for your soldiers? You know, I thought maybe atropine or this or whatever they had for emergency situation. I thought maybe IV vitamin C because someone bought it up. I said, well, it's you guys that bought up all the vitamins, the anticipation of some retaliation. He says, no, it's probably the other government. So in other words, what he's saying was it was not us in the U.S. Army. So I said, what did you have set up for your soldiers? He said, you want to know the truth? I said, that's why I'm here. He said, basically, he said, we tell the soldiers, if you get that close to a nuclear leak or explosion or an accident or something like that, basically look between your legs and kiss your ass goodbye. That was a response, because it's like what Helen Collicott said. He said in a man's way, she said it in a woman's way. There's nothing you can do. And what I'm here to tell you that, and there's a book out there, Dr. John Apsley, and we'll go into this later on, but there is things that you can do. And we're working on it right now. I'm sure in Japan and all over the world. But if you don't start to understand some of these things, you're just going to be a victim. That's basically why I think this meeting was called together. Are we ready?
Okay, I want to cover several grounds in what you're addressed and what Torgen did too. But I want to underscore a very important piece of research that was done at Stanford University. Some of you may not know it, but both Dick and I know it very well. Dr. Bill Tiller,
Yes.
a material science department physicist, proved without a doubt that we all inborn innately with an incredible sense of intuition
Yes.
and ability to intuitive things that are dangerous to us. And his premise was, if we survive this many millions of years, you know, when we couldn't take a leaf of a plant to see if it was safe or not, and most things were poisonous, we had to have inherently that intuition. So as I tell my students when I lecture at universities, is that the intuitive skill you're innately born with has to be essentially activated from here on out. Number one. Number two is the fact is that we are so busy with our lives, multitasking, rushing around and everything else, that the attunement our having a conversation with our own bodies, we don't take the time for. And if you run around people who have had that sense of consciousness that can read into themselves really well, the fact is they have got their early warning system already built in, and that's something we owe to ourselves. We've been given a sacred vehicle to work with and function with, okay? And we need to honor that, because part of that is we are in control of this vehicle ourselves. And while we got a lot of support, we need to get better acquainted with it, and that's really very essential. And that is a priority, you know, in your life. The aspect that I also want to stress is that statistics lie, and liars, you know, tell all sorts of stories. I worked at the World Health Organization. I got 35 years, well, actually since the mid-70s, working on the peripheral of medicine and alternative medicine. I was an advisor to the alternative medicine department at Mount Sinai Hospital, worked in Geneva, everything. And so I saw a lot of it. I saw statistics, and I got a kick out of that business about, oh, gee whiz, we can't tell everybody that. The tourist season is high, okay? Typhoid fever, cholera, all those things, particularly in high-level tourist areas. You'd be amazed how that data ever got suppressed, and it got suppressed all the time. It was a little, you know, should I say, a little understanding here that went on. The thing is that what has happened, I want to say to you, dear lady, to you, Torgerson, anybody from any organization, if the HeartWorks Center can in some way collaborate, cooperate, enhance the knowledge base for everyone, I'm all for it, and I'm glad to cooperate, because we've got quite a list of resources as well. But as Tom pointed out, and all of us, we would like to have a real education classwork here, ongoing education, so that people can be well informed and knowledgeable.
The Diablo nuclear power plant is the last active power plant in California. San Onofre was shut down, and the following speaker will give you the ins and outs of how that happened, as well as the consequences and what we still have to deal with.
Just a little bit about myself. I live down in North County, San Diego. Originally from Malibu. My background is architecture. I'm an architect. I'm also dual degreed from Harvard in urban planning. I've dealt with environmental issues and contamination issues, brownfield reclamation. I understand a little bit about contamination, but I got to say that the nuclear issue is so far off the scale for me. The more I learn, the more concerned I am basically about the exposure that we have living near these facilities, these nuclear facilities. We have one that's about 30 miles from our house. When I got involved in this issue, it was really the Fukushima fallout that had wound up in the food chain down in North County, San Diego. We buy organic milk for our kids. My wife was pregnant with our third child at the time that accident was depositing this into the food chain. What it caused me to do is I'm accustomed to public planning and organizing public forums. There was nothing in the news. There was nothing coming from our regulatory agencies, the EPA, the FDA, the NRC, even internationally, the International Atomic Energy Agency wasn't speaking about this. I tried blogging later on, and the word Fukushima was banned on a news website. I've got pictures of this. I took screenshots of it. What I realized is that there was something, there was a huge sort of redirecting the public's attention away from what was happening in Japan. I understand now why it is. And just in a nutshell, our nuclear industry was created as the flip side of a coin. The other side of that coin is nuclear weapons. That's the basis of all of this. These nuclear power plants, especially the GE Mark I reactors, are very efficient at making plutonium. I had no idea. I'm a nubile to the nuclear industry, but I'm very good at doing research, and I'm very good at connecting dots, and I'm very good at getting on the phone and pulling people together. The nuclear issue in San Diego reached a peak, as I had mentioned before, when Edison was going to try to restart a damaged nuclear reactor for economic reasons, and totally disregarding the 8.4 million people that lived within the 50-mile zone around it. Through friends and connections, I got in contact with people all the way to the top of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. There were a number of us working on this. There was a huge number of groups down there, mostly based out of San Clemente. But the group spread. We started going to our city councils and demanding that the city councils take a position to protect the public from this restart. At first, they wanted nothing to do with us. Then we started bringing in experts. We started bringing in people like Arnie Gunderson and Dan Hirsch. We started bringing in Helen Caldecott. We finally went up to the very top of the federal regulatory framework, and we brought in the former chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Dr. Yasko, who spoke in our favor. Since then, my wife and I have organized 8 international forums, 5 of them co-organized in Japan. That was in September. We had one in June in San Diego County. 3 days after that conference, they shut down San Onofre. Those were economic pressures that were put on Edison. What we've learned from it, though, is kind of disappointing. What we've learned is that we've been left with one of the largest repositories of spent nuclear fuel, nuclear material. We've been talking about the effects of it. We just had an event down in Mexico where a tiny amount, 1.4 ounces of cobalt-60 was stolen from a truck. It wound up out in a field. They evacuated out half a kilometer around this thing, and now they're checking to see how many people have been infected or contaminated by this. They think the people that opened the canister are probably going to die. We have, like I say, 1,630 metric tons of it in pools about 300 yards from the I-5 freeway. You have the same amount here up in Diablo Canyon. What we're concerned about, what I'm concerned about as a planner, is that as we looked into the evacuation planning efforts, we went to our county headquarters to look at their emergency planning. It's a farce. It's an absolute farce. There's no emergency planning. There's no effective way to evacuate people from a fire in one of these spent fuel pools. You know, forget the reactors being shut down. That was a major task, but now we're realizing that we've got this high burn-up fuel. You do too. You have it here, and we've produced maps that show what the Fukushima footprint looks like, superimposed over your power plant. We did it for New York before we had a conference in New York. I want to say that Ralph Nader's jumped into this fight with us. Jean-Michel Cousteau from Ocean Futures has jumped into this fight with us. We have a whole bunch of people that are lining up now, and as you had said, let's put our heads together. We've done all of this down in San Diego and Orange County as citizens, just as yourself. We've educated ourselves, we've contacted our elected officials, and we've decided to do something about it. So we're putting pressure right now to have the fuel moved out of Southern California as quickly as possible, at least at San Onofre. We don't know if it's possible yet. There are a lot of regulatory roadblocks about moving it over state lines and trying to get it farther away from metropolitan areas, but we're learning there's no place to put it. And we came up here to work closely with the World Business Academy, sharing all the information we have. We're producing a tremendous amount of information with the groups down there in Southern California. We're sharing it with Japan, and we're sharing it with the East Coast right now.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Hi again. I want to thank Dr. Stephen Jose. Without Dr. Stephen Jose, I don't know if we would have had the community involvement at the Medical Center of Sansum Clinic and the people who understand that we are in a situation that needs a discussion. Dr. Jose came to our board meeting and we created the Santa Barbara Protocol, which you can see on our website for the United Nations. The Santa Barbara Protocol and Dr. Jose's video of his PowerPoint are there for you to get the facts. And I thank you for listening today. Thank you for watching. We know you are busy and we know you care. Taking that few minutes to find out more facts about Diablo is really important to us. I know that you want to communicate with us, so at the end of this video we'll give you a few websites where you can do more information searching, and we'll also give you our emails. It's important that we hear from you. You know, I know that I had a conference on Fukushima, Diablo, now what, and everybody has an opinion. The most important part is we listen to you also. Thank you for taking the time to be with us and for sharing this video with your friends.
I will be there, yeah, I will be there. Whoa. I will be there, yeah, I will be there. Pretend the past is yesterday, and all that lies before on, but I found my way.
And all that time I just held space.
Let it come, let it go.
You know we don't have no control. I'll cover you should the sky fall.
And that's how our love goes. I will be there for you when times are tough. I will be a hand to lift you up. Climbing the mountains, swimming the sea. No valley too wide, just reach for me. I will be there when times are tough. I will be there to lift you up. Let it rock, let it roll. Just go as the tides flow. Just reach for me. I will be there when times are tough. I will be there to lift you up. Let it rock, let it roll. And that's how our love goes. I will be there for you when times are tough. I will be a hand to lift you up. Climbing the mountains, swimming the sea. No valley too wide, just reach for me.